this presentation, I will explore the vital role that communication plays in managing, in consulting, and engaging project stakeholders to ensure a successful project outcome. And this is what I will be doing. I remember many years in my project management class, one of my favorite professors, who I believe is online with us this morning, mentioned something to us in class that stakeholders are a group of people who do not like to be managed. They don't like to be managed. And so the moment you say you want to manage them, they become a little bit more uncomfortable. But they are comfortable when you say you want to consult them and you want to engage them. So moving from this point, I will be using consulting, engaging, managing interchangeably so that we can move on that point. I will first want to attempt, as it were, to look at what who stakeholders are. And this is not following any particular professional body's definition, but it's an operational definition that all of us are very much familiar with. So who are stakeholders? They are the group of people who have interest in any project's outcome, and they are typically the members of a particular project team. They can be managers, the project managers, the executives, the sponsors, the customers, and the users. And they are those who will be affected at the end of the day by the project at any point in the life cycle of the project, and their input can directly impact the outcome. Moving on, we can also talk about who these stakeholders are, typically who they are. They could be the end users, they could be the managers, like I mentioned, they could be the sponsors, they could be the steering committee members, they could be executives, they could be resource managers, and what have you. It is also important to state here and now that stakeholder management or stakeholder consultation or engagement is very important, because it helps us as those engaging them to successfully identify all opportunities that are hidden within a particular project and maximize benefits from that. It also helps to minimize, just as it's maximizing, it helps us to minimize the negative impact when we carefully identify the right stakeholder groups that we're going to work with, whether we consult them, whether we engage them, whether we manage them, whichever way or whichever approach we use. It helps us to minimize the negative impact which may occur throughout the cycle of the project. And how do we identify such stakeholders? How do we identify them? There are internal stakeholders and there are external stakeholders. And I want to use this opportunity to say that I am privileged. Since I joined Ghana Highway Authority in 2020, September to be specific, I have been part of 2 successful stakeholder consultations that we have carried out. One on the Ayi-Mensah stretch, on the N4 stretch towards the relocation of the toll booth, Ayi-Mensah toll booth, which fell flat, obviously for reasons we all know. I don't want to move into that. I have also been part of a successful stakeholder engagement on the Eastern Corridor Road, and I'm making specific reference to the reconstruction of the Ashaiman Runabout to Akosombo Junction, the Lot 1 project that stretches about 65 kilometers, if my memory serves me right. There's a third one which we started, we did not complete, but I know that there's a pending one that we have to look at, which has got to do with 4 major bypasses on the Accra-Kumasi stretch, which we are putting in the necessary modalities and measures to start that anytime soon, even though some clearing works have started. And so I will proceed from this point to say that once we identify all our stakeholders, we are now looking at them internally and then externally. And who are these internal stakeholders? They are the individuals, the very people we work within our organization, those who contribute towards the project, and making sure that the sponsors, the team members, all those who are connected get their job done. And then the second most important group are those we call the external stakeholders. And they are the groups, or for that word, I want to say the individuals or institutions who can impact or be impacted by the project. And sometimes we describe them as customers, we describe them as suppliers, depending on the role they are playing as far as the project is concerned. Sometimes they are the community members. Sometimes they are the people who are affected directly by the project and what is usually described as the project affected person. In still identifying these stakeholders, there are a number of things that we look at. And if you permit me, I'll walk us through these pointers that I have identified quickly. That we do identification workshops, we do meetings, and in particular reference to the Eastern Corridor project, the reconstruction of the Ashaiman Runabout, Akosombo Junction project that I spoke about, we embarked on a number of workshops, a number of meetings on that stretch. And I remember that we wrote, we communicated with the 6 major municipal, the local authorities on that stretch, all the way from the Ashaiman municipality through the Katamanso area to Shai Osudoku to Lower Manya Krobo district, and then to the Yilo Krobo itself, the municipality, all the way to Esojaman. We spent about a month and a week on that stretch, consistently engaging all the stakeholders on that corridor. We also embarked on what you call the stakeholder analysis and mapping. And I will use this opportunity to say that, you see, once we have been able to identify the potential stakeholders, then we conduct what you call the stakeholder analysis to understand their interests, to also appreciate the kind of influence they can have on the project, their expectations, and the potential impact all these things I've talked about can have on the project. And when we are done with that analysis and we have done the mapping, then we proceed with other programs like the interviews, the surveys that we conduct, and then we continue by further analyzing their influence and their interest again, and then we validate the information that we have. So moving on, I have just shown a picture of one of the sessions that we had opportunity, or one of the sessions, one of the meetings that we got opportunity of, engaging, the community. And if my memory serves me right, this very picture was taken somewhere around the Yilo area, where we met in one of the churches, and together with the local authority, plus all the community reps that were identified in that particular vicinity, and then we engaged all of them. So this picture was actually taken on that stretch, specifically at the Yilo area. And the places I mentioned earlier, I have just shown a map all the way from the Tulaku area, the Ashaiman. And for those of you who are very familiar with this particular corridor, you know that these are the communities that I'm talking about, all the way from Ashaiman through Afariwa, Kakasun, Nanka, Gbechile, all the way up to Atimpoku, where we finally ended at the Esojaman district. We consulted every stakeholder that we thought was relevant as far as this exercise is concerned. Now, after doing this analysis and mapping, we ended up, and permits me to say that if I will want to go through the individual districts, I will not finish now, but I have managed to summarize and then put the groupings in this particular slide that I'm showing on this platform now so that we can all see it. And so these are the categories that we dealt with, the categories from all the way Ashaiman to the Eswojaman area. Of course, we as internal stakeholders, the ministry, the agency as in GHA, plus other government institutions were part of the internal stakeholder group that I spoke about earlier. We can also talk about the district municipal authorities. We know that both the municipalities and the districts provide the basic infrastructural amenities. They collect taxes, they execute plans, the programs that they embark on for effective district development. And all these districts that I've talked about, they have assemblies with assembly members that are elected by the citizens within the area. And their major aim is to bring development at the local level. And then they become accountable to the people. There was the need for us to engage all these people, and we did that. If you talk about the local community, these are the chiefs, the paramounts within that corridor or on that stretch, the councils, I mean, you name them. And they are the key leadership figures that we consulted. If you move to the local institutions, I am looking at the local public service institutions like the educational institutions, the health institutions, the rest. They are the people that we also consulted, and we did everything possible to also engage them. There were a few other international agencies that we also dealt with. There are some businesses, public companies that we also dealt with. Those of you who are familiar with that stretch will know that there's a real road section on that stretch before you get to Doyumu. These are institutions that we considered very critical, and we also dealt with them on that stretch. And then the potentially affected persons, what you want to call the project affected persons. There were institutions on that stretch as well, and we also dealt with them. One critical stakeholder that we did not ignore was the media, and we carried them along at every point so that we believe that they are one of the critical groups that can influence community members and all the people through their programs and let people appreciate what we are doing. So to some extent, we engaged them. There was another tool, a project management tool that we also adopted. And I remember very well. After doing the analysis, after doing the groupings, we, as it were, moved on to introduce what we call the power interest group, because then we had done the analysis to know those who had influence and those who had power as far as the project was concerned. So I am moving back to the groupings that I talked about and the categories, and then I will place them in this power interest grid, and that will help us appreciate what we did along that stretch, together with the consultants, together with our internal stakeholders, when we embarked on that 1 month and a week period to, as it were, engage with all the stakeholders on that stretch. Now, as the power interest grid proposes, these are conventional things that have been, put in place so that when you get to identify the people with high power and interest, you know how to deal with them. So in developing your communication plans, you also are able to tailor-make your messages so that it will suit them. So for instance, when we take our ministry, for instance, which is a key agency as far as this program is concerned, what do we usually do? Yes, because we need to keep them satisfied. We believe that they hold a lot of power. They have influence over the project. So from time to time, as and when we move, we inform them. And how do we inform them? We'll move into that, and then we'll get to see some of the communication tools that we used in informing all these agencies that we felt had so much power and the reasons for which we needed to keep them satisfied. Now, if you move on to the local communities and the reps that I talked about earlier, the district chief executives, the municipal authority, and all the rest, we felt that they had power and they also have high interest. They have power and they have high interest. The conventional way of dealing with them is to keep them closely to us. And that's what the project management principle talks about. So because they are a group of people that are impacted by the project, we need to actively engage them. So from time to time, we need to inform them. So from our office, from all the liaison officers that we had put in place, we kept informing them and sending calls to them just to let them know how far we have gotten with our work. Now, those that we needed to monitor with minimum effort are those local institutions, the civil society groups, the affected communities, and we needed to keep them also informed in a way, but they require less management effort. And these were some of the things we put in place. Those we need to keep informed because we believe that whether you like it or not, they have high interest. And these are the chiefs. These are the community people. These are the business people in the community. These are the institutions along the corridor. The media is part of this group. The project affected persons, they are part of this group. They have high interest. And I can share one of such interests with you. We got to a community where there was this coffee brookman seller, what you call roasted plantain seller, who approached us and wanted to find out what exactly was going on. So I took pains to explain to her what was actually going to happen. Immediately, she realized that her business will be affected, will be interrupted. But we had to use that opportunity to inform her and let her know that, well, even though A, B, C, D was going to happen, these are the modalities that have been put in place so that we don't affect your livelihood. It is not disturbed in a way. Even if that will happen, the assembly will have a way of dealing with it. And that's the way to inform some of these people who we consider as stakeholders with high interest as far as the project is concerned. Now, we managed to put together a number of concerns and issues that were raised as we moved along in the various communities, all the way from a Shaiman to a Sojaman. And I have summarized that and put them in these bullets as we can all see on the platform. So it is not district specific, but it cuts across because a number of the pointers raised were same issues that actually were raised. And I want to talk about the environment, for instance. People spoke about the environmental impacts the project was going to have on them. They spoke about dust, they spoke about the noise, they spoke about waste, they spoke about floods in situations where there are excavations and then it rains and then some sections of the road are rendered unmotorable. They even suggested what we should do by putting in place some mitigating efforts, as it were, to reduce the burden they're going to have. Then if we move on to the local economy, for instance, and the impact on their livelihoods, some of them reiterated a number of issues that we must even look at it again and see how we can replace some of the jobs that they are going to lose by providing them with local jobs, some form of training, what you want to call the vocational training. All these issues came up. Getting involved, the youth, and making sure that we also bring them closer, to us. Resettlement issues also came up. And this is where our valuation people actually were so much involved. In speaking, to the issues, getting the local authorities involved and how we can minimize the disruptions and clarify land ownership issues and all. There were issues regarding community health, safety, and development. And concerns about traffic management issues came up. And our engineers from survey and design, those who went with us to explain or get the stakeholders to appreciate what the design profile or the design protocols will be like, for them to appreciate all the modalities that have been put in place. And then there was another important issue that came up. I remember when we were gathering all these concerns, the cultural issue, the cultural heritage of that corridor. And for those of you who are very familiar again, you know there are two sacred hills on that stretch. And I am making specific reference to these two sacred hills. The one on the approach from the Afienya, that belongs to the Yulokrobo people, and the one on the Akuse side of the Lower Manya area. And both hills, as we all know, are sacred places for the people, and they hold annual festivals every year. We know what they do there. And for them, their concern is that the hills must be respected as such. And so the chiefs, the elders, the opinion leaders were asking for resources for the performance of certain traditional rituals even before the commencement of the project. And a lot was said about the Shy Hills, its ecological, the tourism, potentials, and all the research value that these two hills bring about. I also remember people talking about the Krobo Mountains, a key archaeological site, and that we cannot ignore. One other area or one other facility they talked about was the Monkey Sanctuary on that stretch. And I remember we got the opportunity to explain to some of them because there was some misinformation regarding the fact that the corridor was going to affect or disrupt, or let me say, even destroy the habitat of the monkeys in that area. We had the opportunity to visit even after the stakeholder engagement. I remember with the Honorable Minister for Roads and Highways, Honorable Kwesi Amwakwata, and this issue came up again, and we used the opportunity to explain to them that no matter the situation, we have actually engaged a number of institutions, government institutions, the wildlife people, the environmental people, and there are plans, as it were, to still maintain the habitat as it is, so that the road project will not disturb the habitat or destroy or disturb the natural environment where the monkeys are. So we used the opportunity, because these issues came up, to just address, some of these concerns. Now, after we were done with all of this, it set the basis for our communication plan, because the thing is that if you don't embark on all these things that I have talked about, there's no way you can have a communication plan. You need a formidable communication plan to proceed from this point. And we thought that it was important that we establish that. And so one of the things we considered was that there was a need for us to first define our goals, which we already know. And we know that the project is the reconstruction of the Shaiman Runabout to Akosombo Junction, Lot 1. That obviously fits into our objective. That's the objective for the project. And so once we know the objective for the project, how do we define our goals? How do we define our communication goals? That will help us to identify the key messages that we will now develop, so that we can communicate to all the various stakeholders that we have identified and put them in groups. Because the communication that goes to the chiefs obviously will be different from the communication that comes to the ministry, that comes to our bosses here at GHA, that goes to the district assemblies and all that. And these are the key messages that I am making reference to. The second most important point has got to do with identifying the appropriate communication methods that we were going to use, and then developing appropriate or corresponding channels that we will communicate these messages to. So we'll select some methods, and I'll share some of the conventional things that we did to arrive at those communication channels and methods. The third most important thing, again, is also to establish a feedback mechanism where people who are worried and are not too sure of what was going on can find a way of getting back to us. And there's the reason for which we started developing our social media handles and a number of channels that we developed so that they can engage us. So there's no need to now call a particular, let's say, a defunct telephone line that is not working. But again, let me use this opportunity to say a big thanks to management again for appreciating this important step and for making sure that we reactivate some of these channels and lines that we have so that people will use that as feedback mechanisms to get to us. And then we can also send them information as and when they need them. So getting back to defining our goals and moving on with the channels, I have put these 4 pointers in this colorful bullet points so that we can quickly talk about it. The communication channel formula that we used. This is a very popular communication channel that has been used over the period. And so when you get to know the number of stakeholder groups you are dealing with, you just plug into this formula. When N is the number of stakeholders you're dealing with, then N into bracket N-1/2. It's a way to numerically show the importance of proper communications management on each project. So for instance, if we have 5 internal stakeholders we are dealing with, we need to determine the number of communication lines that we're going to use. So we plug it in, and then we have 10 communication lines. And these were some of the things we did that informed us to determine how we communicate with all the stakeholders. So for instance, with GHA, these are some of the things that we do. Direct meetings, briefings, the local community, we either develop flyers or rely on the local radio stations, or we do face-to-face consultations, or if it's got to do with the media, it's about press releases, it's about the briefings that we organize for them, or maybe once in a while we organize site tours for them in that order. So these are some of the pictures I want to share during one of such interactions that we had with them. We also established, I spoke about the feedback and response mechanisms. If I want to go through all of this, it's going to take much of my time, but I will share these slides later on, and then we can all, the most important thing again is to establish that two-way communication channel so that we can manage stakeholder expectations. And we did that diligently. Another important thing that I want to talk about, Chief Executive, is putting in place a communication crisis. And once you run a project management program like this, you must know that risks are inherent and you need to plan towards them and see how communication can also present itself, as a form of risk. When it happens, what do? You must have a crisis communication plan. So identify the crisis, create emergency contact list, dedicate channels for that, develop plan to handle media. And GHA has done that recently. I can authoritatively speak to that because I sit in that office where we have put in place all those dedicated communication channels where people can reach out to us. And then we pick it up from there and communicate with them. And then we must always get ahead of misinformation. And we can only do that by presenting facts. And I think that we have also done this. Monitoring evaluation is also critically important. And we also considered that. Putting in place flexibility, adaptability, just to get people involved by pivoting the change or the changes that we anticipate are likely to happen so that it will help us review some of the things that we do. If we follow these modalities religiously, I know that we can develop a well-structured communication plan that effectively will engage all stakeholders and support the success of all our initiatives. And I would want to conclude on this point, Chief Executive. But before I do that, I want to say that a strategic communication plan is always an integral one to effective stakeholder engagement. Defining your objectives, tailoring them to your multi-channel outreaches that I've talked about, establishing your robust feedback mechanisms or channels, and demonstrating receptiveness through that two-way channel dialogue system, preparing your crisis plans, continuously monitoring effectiveness, building in what you want to call the flexibility, productive relationships, managing expectations, provides us with a platform where all of us can make an informed decision. So communication must be proactive, it has to be transparent, it has to be consistent, and it's only when we actively engage, we listen, we collaborate with stakeholders throughout the entire project that every organization can build an understanding and trust to drive shared success. Chief Executive, I want to thank you once again for the opportunity you have given me to share my experience with like-minded people, like I mentioned earlier on this very important topic.